believe that this whole thing about getting into the CPH, the program that I was in, I mean, I don't know how it happened in the first place. It's because I got in trouble with school, and then they basically coerced and threatened me, and then I never even heard of CPH until this happened, until I was sent there. That's the amazing thing.
Right.
It was this secret operation that was going on just a few miles from home, just a few miles from where I lived, and it was going on right under my nose, and then it turned out to be a scam, and it was a failure. These programs are failures.
Right.
Because a lot of times, the people who were in this program when I was there, they've all turned out to be, they haven't gone on to become CEOs and really prosperous people or anything. They've all ended up in some sort of criminal problem or drug abuse or some other kind of problem like that. I mean, CPH is I don't know about. I don't know statistically what the number is, but these programs like this have a failure rate, a very high failure rate, and it's almost 100%.
Yeah.
The failure rate is almost 100% because almost every person. I mean, if I happen to find their Facebook page now, these are people who became grandparents by the time they were 30.
Wow.
A lot of them are, or they would end up, with some sort of drug problem or crime or something like that. So they never actually became successful. They never became prosperous.
Do you think one of the issues is that because of the brutality and fascist nature at these programs, that anyone who had a slight problem with authority figures, it just exacerbates it to the point? I've spoken to a lot of survivors, and even myself, I demand mutual respect from anyone I work with. If I work for a company or for a supervisor, I expect to be treated with respect and with courtesy and with professionalism, and not to be talked down to or mistreated or abused in any fashion. I think that's a reasonable expectation, but I think when one of the last was it the last one I went on? I think the last job interview I went on, I actually did get the job, though, and I was happy that my, little hypervigilant PTSD moment didn't cost me the job. But I sat down and I said, well, before I accept the position, I need to know that you treat your employees with respect and that, you will not treat me in a degrading manner, and that you have a professional ethic, that you are courteous and appreciative of your employees and the work they do. And she got a little freaked out because she was younger than me, because I'm old now. I'm as old as you. We're both 41. So she was 25 or 26, a young person interviewing me, a younger person. And she was like, well, I might have a bad day and say something and be short with you. Would you have a problem with that? And I was like, no, I don't have a problem with people being short with me. I do have a problem with people degrading me or saying, are you stupid, don't you know how to do this? If it's my first day and I don't know how to do something because I haven't been trained on it yet, I don't appreciate being called stupid. So it was more along those lines, but that worked out. But I just think the question for you was, do you think that is part of the problem, that, that these places are so overbearing with their authoritarian fascist behavior that people are triggered, that survivors are triggered by anyone who exudes a sense of authority, and that becomes a barrier to gainful employment?
Yes, I think it does have I think it has a real effect, because these programs do not treat us with respect.
Right.
They did not treat me with respect. They were fascists. They were authoritarian, and they did not treat me with respect at all. and you know, I mean, they talked down to us. They treated us like a bunch of, I mean, they acted like something was wrong with us. They insulted us and all that stuff. So so it does create problems like that.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
And another thing about this is that this place, this program, they were fraudulent. They committed insurance fraud. I mean, I have no objection to saying that they committed insurance fraud because I can prove that they committed insurance fraud because I still have the paperwork that proves it because since it's a health care facility, they kept going through, you know, my family's health insurance. And every month or so, or maybe it was every few weeks, the health insurer would send out a letter approving me to stay there longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's obvious they committed insurance fraud. It's obvious they were making stuff up to try to keep me, so the insurer would approve it.
Right, so that's where the statement's like, well, you're delusional, maybe we're going to mark that. That's something similar to what Grace was saying in my experience, too, is to try to make you say something that isn't true. I know they tried to get me to say I was a drug addict also, and I'd never done drugs, and they tried to get me to say I was promiscuous and I was a virgin. Anyway.
I mean, if the program wants to sue me for saying that they committed insurance fraud, let them go ahead and sue me because I have the paperwork. And the thing is, I never even saw this paperwork. I may have seen it briefly once years ago, but it wasn't until probably about 14 years later that I saw this paperwork because my parents have it. And that was a smoking gun.
Right.
The paperwork is pretty much a smoking gun that proves that they scammed the insurer.
Yeah.
Unless the insurer's in on it too, or something, in which case it's still
Regents or Blue Shield Regents.
This was Blue Cross and Blue Shield, by the way. I mean, all these programs are based in Utah and all that stuff.
I know. I don't know. Something's wrong with Utah.
I think another really bad one is Missouri.
Missouri's bad, too.
Florida,
Texas. The whole strip. There's like a crazy strip right inland from the West Coast. I call it the crazy strip, which is Montana, Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. It's like the fucking crazy states. I mean, they're crazy. They're just like, I don't even like to drive through them. Anyway, I don't need to recap all that trip, but
mostly Illinois is not as bad as most of the other states. That's what I've heard. I've heard that one of the local programs tried to expand into Illinois, and Illinois wouldn't let them.
Oh, Chicagoland? Yeah, that was on the border, I think. Was that the one you're talking about, where PFC was, like, going to expand?
I think they tried to do that with Michigan, too, and I think Illinois and Michigan, I think maybe another one, say, like West Virginia or something, told them they couldn't do it.
Okay.
Something like that. But Indiana and Ohio, I think, the states around here, Indiana's probably the worst. Or it was a few years ago.
Indiana's really bad. I think they're a right-to-work state, and they won't regulate at all, not even the faith-based programs, even though, like, all those people, and you were involved in that, too, in protesting at Hephzibah House, right? You went out there a couple of times. So
we went to several protests in Indiana.
Yeah. So I think Indiana is really problematic. I've written Indiana for help. Like, okay, I think they're one of the states where this is an issue because I have to update the page where we tell people how to report. Thankfully, Ivy checked to see what the proper links are, if any of them were dead, and send them to me, so I just have to go put them in really quick. But the report page on Indiana and I think one or two other states, they have no state Department of Labor. They only say if you have a problem, if somebody is violating labor laws, to call the federal 800 number for labor law violations, that they have no state department to handle that. I think that's crazy.
Yeah, you would think there would be some sort of, well, it's a so-called right to work state, so it's probably, so their labor laws are pretty weak.
Yeah, very.
They're trying to pass that in Kentucky too, but nobody in Kentucky supports it. But they're trying to do it county by county. So I don't know how that's going to work out. But
well, that's funny because this is a different issue. But they legalized medical marijuana has been legalized in Washington State for some time, but they recently legalized recreational use for marijuana. And with the medical marijuana, I think a city tried to ban it. A city tried to ban medical marijuana and make it illegal for people to possess marijuana in the city limits, whether it was for medical purposes or not. They just said no, and you can't have any. Not only did they say we're not going to have any dispensaries, but you also can't have it. So I'm like, my grandmother died from cancer in Kent. Are you telling me that she couldn't have had medical marijuana to help her pain? That's bullshit.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense how they do this.
Yeah.
And they say like, well, the cities and the counties can pass their own laws, but only if it's something that we agree with. That's their that's the whole mentality that they work from. Is they said, well, the states and counties can pass their own local ordinances, but only if it's something that only applies if it's something that they agree with.
Well, you know what? I'm starting to work on that here locally, but I need to get that report on foster care before I can really tackle it with the Everett people. I live in Everett, Washington right now. I wanted to see if this would work. I wanted to see if I could get the city council or the mayor to do an executive order saying no child residing in the city of Everett or Snohomish County or our entire county could be shipped out of the county for treatment purposes. Without their like informed consent or whatever. I know they have to like say, well, we can't just say no, but we can put like a serious restriction on it where you can't send a kid who doesn't want to go without due process or something like that. You know what I mean? So I really want to see if I can get that done. But they've all offered to meet with me, and I haven't gotten back with them because I'm waiting on this stupid report from the foster care system. DSHS, I wrote them August 7th of 2014, and I said, here's what I want. And this is what I asked for, Tim. It was not the moon, believe me. I said, how many children have been enrolled in private residential facilities or group homes since, for the last 5 years? I think I requested the last 10, but they said that was too cumbersome, so I said the last 5 is fine. I said for the last 5 years, how much money have you spent on those enrollments, and what is your vendor list? What programs have you placed them in? Those are my 3 questions. They can't answer that quickly. Can you believe that? This is something they said, oh, well, we don't have a report that says that. We're going to have to contact all these other agencies to get that data for you. And then they told me it would take 3 months. They said they would get back to me by December 7th. Then they said December 18th. The last time I contacted them, they said, I'm sorry, because it's such a lot of information. It's taking us longer than expected, but we are going to have it out to you by January 8th. I still haven't received anything except for notifications of postponing, getting me the information. And I'm like, that scares the crap out of me. How come Washington can't tell me immediately, DSHS, where our children are? You should be able to tell me where Washington's children are immediately. Not, what if there was a fucking state crisis where, like, I don't know, like some big earthquake, their family dies, I don't know, like some kind of weird big crisis in Washington State, a tsunami, I don't know, and they have to be notified that there's been a national emergency. I'm like, or an emergency in their home state. Like, you don't even know how to notify them because you don't keep track of that in an organized manner.
Yeah, that's like what happens in Florida. Like, remember a few years ago, about 10 years ago, how Florida had that big scandal where they kept losing the foster children?
Yeah.
It's sort of like that.
And I think that's a national crisis. I'm like, you can't lose children. If you're going to take children away from their families, which may be fucked up beyond belief, I know. I grew up in an interesting family. I know that things happen in family environments that aren't really okay for children to be around. But you know what? Worst thing happens in institutional environments where children really shouldn't be around. It's like children really shouldn't be institutionalized. It's not appropriate. It's not good for them. It doesn't do anything good for them ever. So that obviously, I just don't understand this idea that it's okay to take someone. I always tell people this. I'm like, when you're dealing, I used to volunteer with battered women and children. And, like, when you're dealing with abused children, you have to consider what is the safer environment for that child. Now, is it an institution? Probably not. And their house might be fucked up, too. But their house, it depends on how fucked up the house is, whether or not their life's in danger. So I think that if you know someone's triggers, if you know their mood, it's easier for you to survive that situation. And I think if you have that experience and you know how to navigate an abusive household, it's unfortunate anyone would have to develop those skills, but those are skills they've developed. And I'm like, well, leave them in that situation unless their life's threatened, because their life's going to be threatened at a program. You know, if it's a psychiatric hospital, they could die of a drug overdose, or they could be given permanent brain damage or chemical lobotomy or physical lobotomy or electroshock that erases their mind, you know, or, you know, there's some really nasty things that go on at some of the programs that were believed to go on at some of the programs. Do they have girls and boys in the same unit?
At the program I was in, not on the same unit.
Okay.
I guess on the same floor, but not on the same unit.
Okay.
I think at the time that I was there, I think there was 51 kids there. So there was only 51 at any time. And any time somebody was discharged, they would immediately recruit someone else to replace them.
Mm.
So there was always 51. So that number never changed. It was 51 at any given time back then.
Did your school, you think they coerced your parents or into enrolling or putting you at CPH?
Well, I think they coerced all of us. I think they probably coerced me more than they coerced my parents. I think they coerced, they basically coerced all of us. And they kind of, because the thing is, I mean, I got in trouble at school. I mean, I got kicked out of school and everything. For some reason, they led my parents to think that there just wasn't any other option, which is silly, because there's, school is compulsory. You can't just quit school. I mean, you have to go until you're 18.
Right.
So it's not like I couldn't just not go to school. I mean, it would probably be, I'd probably have to take a bus to a school in a nearby county or something, but I'd still be able to go to school. But instead, they just completely resort to the program instead of finding a school.
I'd be curious if there was some kind of kickback relationship between CPH and your school. There's definitely the school people and the CPH people were definitely in cahoots with each other, and they scared us. They scared my parents, and they scared me, thinking something terrible was going to happen if I didn't do exactly what they said. Yes, you'll end up dead or in jail.
Yeah, they'll end up dead or in jail. That's another thing. People who, the kids that were in that place mostly did end up dead or in jail.
Right.
Or they ended up either in jail, or they died young, or they became drug addicts. So that's, of course, there's also the whole thing where if I pointed this out to the program, if I said to CPH, well, look, you have a 100% failure rate, of course they would blame us. They would say, well, that's because you didn't do what we told you to do.
You didn't work your program.
We didn't work the program. That would be their excuse. So it was the program coerced the program. They coerced us. And then after I got there, after I signed the contract and went in, I think they told me that if I didn't like the program, that I could leave. I could then just sign myself out. But then once I got there and said, well, I don't like this, on the very first day there, I said, well, I don't like this program. I'm going to sign myself out. And they said, no, you can't do that, because we'll take you to court if you try to do that. And we have judges who are on our side, and they will order you to be locked up even longer.
Wow.
And there's probably a lot of corruption with the judicial system, too.
Right. Or just an intimidation tactic. I mean, if you tell a bunch of people that there's no point fighting it because they'll win anyway, and they say, well, you're in a mental hospital, and nobody's going to believe you anyway, and they're just going to court order you here for longer, so you better just do what we say.
Yeah, it's possible that there were any, that none of the judges around here back then were really even on their, were really even on their side. But I doubt that, though. I'm sure there's a lot of...
Oh, I'm sure there was some corrupt judges in Kentucky. Don't worry. I wasn't saying, don't besmirch the reputation of Kentucky judges.
A lot of corrupt... probably county commissioners and legislators, mayors, things like that. I mean, I know there's some terrible legislators. I mean, Kentucky's had some terrible, terrible legislators. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was some legislators or probably some county commissioner or something that was involved in all this. Probably some judges. It might not have been as many as it appeared to be, but I'm sure that there probably were some, and probably some police and things like that.
Yeah, they were grandfathered in.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the law before the...
I only like grandfather clauses once in a while. Most of the time, I think when somebody's grandfathered in, I think it's bullshit, because you see that with this industry all the time. They'll be like, there's this one program in Idaho that was an orphanage, it's been open for 140 years or some shit, and it's licensed solely as an orphanage, and it's grandfathered in, and it advertises itself as a behavior modification program or as a youth treatment facility, a residential treatment facility, but there's no qualified staff, big shocker, and it's only licensed as an orphanage, and only because it's been grandfathered in because it's existed for so long. And I'm like, well, I don't know how things like that get grandfathered in when it cannot be possible. I mean, I guess it's possible, but that's a big stretch. You got some 200-year-old jerk who's running the place, who's run it since the beginning. I'm like, there's no way that the people there are old enough where that would even make sense.
I mean, I don't see how they could do that. If just because it existed before the current laws passed, I mean, it's just silly.
Yeah.
If the newer laws are designed to protect people, and yet they're allowing older institutions to opt out of them, and there's not much point in having the
right. Well, they were grandfathered in. That's the excuse. I love that when some regulator. I just think it's ridiculous when something that is grandfathered in. I just think, and the fact that legislators expect you to accept that as the reason, as a reasonable basis, it was grandfathered in. And that's the end of it. Let's shut the book and shut the story, and there's no more talk to be done about it because it was grandfathered in. I don't know. I'm like, well, then grandfather in the original recipe for Coca-Cola that contained cocaine. Grandfather in all that shit. I know Coca-Cola would love to be able to put cocaine in its drink, and I know that people will be addicted to it in a heartbeat. My mom said that, some of her older relatives were seriously addicted to Coca-Cola when it was its original formula. They outlawed it in 1919 or 1920, right around the time of the Prohibition. Anyway, that's a different story. But I'm like, well, grandfather in the original Coca-Cola recipe, grandfather in all this stuff. If we're going to just grandfather stuff in, well, Coke's existed since the 1800s. We can't make them change the recipe now.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like.
Yeah. People always ask us if we can go, I'll get emails for HEAL saying, have you guys ever thought about doing undercover work? And I'm like, man, I have thought about it, but there's no way. I know myself well enough to know I couldn't tolerate the environment, both because of post-traumatic stress and because I would find it intolerable. I would find the whole experience intolerable. I'd have a very difficult time keeping my eye on the prize and going, just gather as much data as you can until you can't take it anymore and then report it to the authorities. You know what I mean? I'd have a really hard time as soon as I saw someone being manhandled or restrained or abused, not speaking up. It's just not in my nature to stay silent on things like that. Like, I don't think I could do it. I don't want anybody doing anything like that. I'm too protective of everybody. I don't know. I just don't want anyone getting hurt or putting themselves in harm's way. There was a wilderness program in Utah that asked me to come out and spend a weekend with their crew in the wilderness in Utah. And I said, well, I have to look at my schedule. I may not be able to do it. I told them that I might be able to have another volunteer do it because I thought, well, maybe someone who lives in Utah wouldn't mind doing it or whatever. I said I might be able to find another volunteer, or if I do it, I would like to bring a person with me. Can I bring a guest, whether it's, and I said like an attorney or personal security or even just a friend or law enforcement. I said, can I bring anyone with me? And they said no. They said no. They said I couldn't bring anyone with me. And so I was like, fuck you then. There's no fucking way I'm going out into the wilderness with program people by myself. You guys can, come up with some other plan to get me. We don't know what happened. She signed the waiver because I'm sure they'd have me sign a liability waiver for even my death if I were to even go up in the wilderness with them, or else they would say, well, we can't do it if you won't sign the liability waiver, and then they can murder me and no one would even be able to do anything about it or whatever. It'd be weird. I don't know. She's missing. What program was that? I think it was Wingate. I want to say it was Wingate Wilderness Therapy that invited me to come out. And then when I refused to come out without having my own, personal, caveats added, they were like, oh, well, we've invited her to come to the program, and she's refused. And I'm like, you invited me to go out into the wilderness with you without bringing any type of security or safety net for myself, and I'm supposed to just go along with you. When you have, people whose other programs were closed down for sexual abuse as directors of your program, you're crazy. I'm not going. I just thought that was unreasonable. Don't you think it's unreasonable? You can't bring someone with you?
Yeah, that's pretty silly.
But they're always pulling that stuff. Oh, well, I still get that once in a while. I get an email from a program saying they love what we do. This is what they're doing now. I don't know if you ever get these kinds of emails, but they'll say, well, we love what HEAL does. We think you're a much-needed force out here because there are some very bad programs. However, our program is not bad, and we shouldn't be on your watch list. So what can we do about that? They try to act like they're being all nice, and they support what we're doing. And then they say things like underhanded things, like manipulative things, like, well, we can see that you've done a lot of research and that you take what you do very seriously, and we applaud that. However, we're afraid that by having us on your list, you may be discrediting your good work because we're such a great program that by having us on your list, it makes you look like you're not doing due diligence, And I'm like, you're freaking nuts. I always just tell them the same thing. Send me your paperwork and your student handbook, and we'll go from there. They don't send it in. Or they'll send me a brochure. I've had tons of them send me a brochure, but never what I asked for, which is the contracts and the handbooks. Like, I could give two shits about your brochures. I can go online and see your brochures. I don't need to see your brochures. I want to know what you're making parents and kids agree to, and I want to know somewhat of what your methods are. Because like you were saying, they schedule every part of your day, so you don't have any free time, and that's a stress-causing environment, not a stress-relieving environment. So if we're dealing with mentally ill people, you would give them enough free time so that they could relax and reflect or whatever they need to do during certain points of the day. If it was really a mental health situation, you don't jam-pack a mentally ill person's day. You give them time to rest. So that's weird. You're not mentally ill. I'm not mentally ill. I'm just saying if either of us were mentally ill, the way these programs operate would not effectively treat our mental illness, which does not exist anyway.
Yeah, the whole program was a scam.
Yeah.
fraud. It was just complete. It was downright a ripoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of the important issues regarding this program.
So, are you good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.
Arcadia, Louisiana, new Bethany home for girls. Young girls escape this compound and tell local authorities that they have been raped, bruised, and beaten. The authorities respond by taking them back to the abusive home. This has been going on for years. It is 2013. The survivors of abuse at New Bethany learned that the state of Louisiana made some changes in the rules regarding statutes of limitations. There are no statutes of limitations for forcible rape, and for those abused when they were 17 and younger, it is now 30 years. Armed with this new piece of information, the survivors of New Bethany came together to accompany their own to support them as they testified before the grand jury about abuse suffered at the hands of the proprietor, Mac Ford. The New Orleans Times-Picayune accompanied Jennifer Halter and the other women as they addressed the grand jury. In this excerpt, Sheriff Balancer calls one of his first investigations of the Mac Ford compound.
I noticed that her legs were scratched up and bleeding, crying. And I wonder to this day if there was something else more I could have done.
You carry a badge, you carry a gun, you can do something. It don't matter who tells you not to, and you didn't do nothing. And how many times did you watch New Bethany and did not do nothing? You did, and he was like, it's not true. He said, you don't understand. I spoke to people, but I said, you spoke to, he didn't speak to nobody. He never came back to New Bethany about it.
Tammy Jump, a graduate of Pat Robertson's Regent University, is being singled out by survivors of New Bethany for having connections to the family of Mac Ford.
She just seemed very unorganized. Mike Epps told me, because I told him, he goes, well, you're going to be going in. I said, well, who's going to be going in with me? He said, no, you're going to be going by yourself. And I said, oh, wait a minute, now I have an issue here. And I said, you're going to put me in a room with nine people that I don't even know? I don't think that's going to go very well. He said, oh, no, Tammy Jump's going to be in there with you. I said, who is that? He said, that's a district attorney. That's the one that's going to be asking you questions. She's on your side. She never once, until one time, did she say to the grand jury, do you have any questions for her? At all. Because the grand jury had to keep asking me, I have a question, I have a question, I have a question. She never once did that. When I specifically said, whose side are you on? My side or his side? She did not answer me.
Now that the grand jury has reached their decision, the survivors of New Bethany are now talking about what went on behind the closed doors of the grand jury. This is the story of white knights with mud on their face. This is the story of good intentions gone awry. Now that the victims have come together by themselves and are organizing and fighting for their own, on February 14th, join me on this YouTube channel as we learn how they fought back.